Hello, and welcome to the Write Club podcast, where we take you behind the pages and into the fascinating world of writing. I'm Beth, and I'm joined, as always, by Mary. Hi, Mary. How are you doing today?
I'm great, thank you. Today we're delighted to be joined by best-selling author Gytha Lodge. Gytha is a multi-award-winning playwright, novelist, and writer for video games, best known for her gripping DCI Jonah Sheen's crime series, which has been translated into more than a dozen languages and became an international bestseller with her debut, She Lies in Wait.
Yes, and she's back this summer with something brand new, a standalone thriller titled Dead to Me. It's a tense, twist-filled story of love, betrayal, and a survival set against the darkly atmospheric backdrop of Cambridge's elite. Already hailed as propulsive and hugely immersive, this book is a must-read for fans of smart, twisty thrillers.
Welcome to the Write Club podcast. Where are you joining us from today?
Oh, hello. It's so lovely to be here. Joining you from Cambridge, or in fact, the very edge of Cambridge. So I have a lovely field view out the back that I won't be getting distracted by, I promise.
And is that your usual writing space? Could you describe it for us?
Yes, so I often write in my room. There's also a room downstairs that I use. To be honest, in my heart of hearts, I'm probably a coffee shop writer. But what I've discovered is I get more done in my life and around the house if I come back from the school run and work from home, because it means that when I'm getting up and being fidgety, instead of going buying cake or going and finding someone to talk to in the coffee shop or eavesdropping on people's conversations, which is also lovely fun, I actually then go and do some gardening or do the laundry or get the house tidy. So it does work better for me, even though my innate love of company tends to draw me out. So I allow myself a little bit of coffee shop time in a week, but then try to make myself work from home the rest of the time. So I have the two spaces so I don't feel too claustrophobic, and then the garden to jump out into, which is my other massive obsession.
Oh, I love that. I wish I could be a coffee shop kind of writer or worker, but I would get so distracted. I am such a people watcher that I'd be sat there trying to work and I would just be watching everybody else.
I mean, I'm not saying that doesn't happen quite a lot, like it does, but I think it depends on whether I'm in sort of my, like, writing hyper focus mode when I'm really in it for a bit, and then when I need to have a little break, because I mean, I'm very ADHD and I am sort of a burst of focus, then I need to get up and move person. And if I need to move around, then getting to move around and then sort of watching some people as I go is perfect, because it kind of occupies that other bit of my brain while things are on the back burner. So I think it works quite well up to a point. If I start having a chat, it's a disaster because I am so easily distracted into another bit of chat and another bit of chat, and it just gets out of hand. So I have to be quite self-disciplined about not making it a social activity, but making it into a work activity.
Yeah, and then the next thing you know that you've been talking to somebody for like 2 hours and got nothing done.
This happens so badly. I am awful. And I also sometimes think, I have this awful thing where I'll be talking on for a bit and then I'll go, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I have just been talking at you for the last 10 minutes. How are you? Yeah, bad for both of us, I guess.
Yeah, I can imagine. I suppose if they're trying to work as well, they probably want a little bit of conversation too. Let's just go with that.
Yeah. I mean, that's the worst, isn't it? It's when you find a fellow person who's supposed to be working and you just take each other down.
Yeah. Oh dear. And congratulations on the release of Dead to Me. I absolutely loved reading it and I really genuinely could not put it down. For those who haven't picked it up yet, would you be able to give us just a little bit of a snapshot on the story?
Of course. So, Dead to Me is my first standalone, and it's been really lovely getting to set something in Cambridge, which is my hometown, rather than in the New Forest, which is also fun. But this has been really kind of close to me. A lot of my university experiences, updated, have been in there. It's about a journalist investigating the death of a very promising student at a May ball. So, a really fancy, really lavish event that happens at the end of each year, and this is one of the really big ones. Uh, um, and so this student has died during the fireworks. Nobody has noticed, and the journalist has ended up investigating because although the police have decided it looked like an accident due to drug overdose, a lot of things haven't added up. Anna's gone in there and she's a very impulsive, very determined person. And she's taken things a little bit far. She's gone undercover as a student herself to try and get in with the people who must have been involved. And now she herself has gone missing at the same event 1 year later. The only person who probably can help her is her ex-boyfriend, who everything ended very badly with. So he gets this email from her, including a lot of very sort of painful stuff about their relationship and some very funny stuff in there too. And he has to decide basically whether he can put aside all of that and actually go and find her when he kind of never wants to see her ever again.
I think that's a brilliant description of the plot, to be honest. And I really liked the way that it was written in terms of like the structure and how it was all from different points of view. And I really enjoyed especially the parts from the main character about her email, like her writing her email, and getting it kind of from her point of view. I thought it was genius.
Oh, that's so nice. It was so much fun to write. I love trying to get kind of someone's voice down onto the page and getting to write in Anna's voice because she's such a very distinctive character. The way that her brain works, that she's super smart, but she's always off in a million different directions. And yet she's also that person who once she sort of fixates on something, she will not let go. And there are consequences to that, right? As we find out during the book, she's not always careful of other people's feelings, and that has, backlash for her. She is doesn't always think through whether she's going to get herself into danger. And as things start to unfold, you realize why she's ended up in what is an incredibly dangerous situation, and why Reed, who is the steady, very, very moral, very reliable one, is the person who can probably rescue her. And yet he is the one person who ultimately really let her down.
Yeah.
So, I love the kind of the interplay between those two characters, and also getting to write. When you see, there's some from her, as you know, from the perspective of her father as well, who's also a very different character himself. He's an academic. He's also an incredibly bright guy, but he's very different from her. He is someone who's always perfectly turned out. He's always on time. He really cares about sort of a certain aura of respectability, and he finds her baffling because she didn't grow up with him. She grew up in the States with her mum when she left him, and the two of them are trying to now reconnect whilst really not understanding each other. He's emotionally very closed off while she's very open. So the two of them are really different. And there was so much fun to be had drawing out how each of them thinks, but also what they think about each other, and how those opinions are so different. Her father's take on Reed when he interacts with him as well. There's so much kind of implicit humor in that, as well as some really sad points, because there's an underlying theme of grief in the novel as well. The fact that really underlies why the two of them broke up in the first place. And also the grief of the fact that her father is realizing how much of her life he missed out on
Mm,
because he couldn't have that relationship with her mother,
yeah.
and because he never predicted saying to her, I don't love you anymore, would drive her away, and that he'd lose that. So there's a lot of shame, a lot of guilt, and then a lot of him drinking champagne to try and get round his feelings.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's worth noting as well, actually, that um, we've spoken a lot about everything that kind of happens and all the themes in this book, but yet none of that was a spoiler. So there is so much that happens in this book that yet we could talk about just the first chapter for an hour and there would still not be a spoiler.
Oh, great. Yeah. I think I like that whole way of weaving a plot where things come out bit by bit. I think it's so satisfying. I think to a reader and to a writer, that feeling of when information kind of gets parceled out. Because as a person, you discover things about people bit by bit. I know in my life, I have met and encountered people who I've trusted implicitly, and then later on found out that there were some really massive things that they've lied to me about. And I think that always ends up informing the way that you write, because it's that feeling as a reader where you meet people, you meet characters, and working out whether to trust them is is a big deal. It's not always as simple as here's a person and I like them and they are therefore a good person, and
Mhm.
it's not always as simple as here's someone with a secret and therefore they're a really bad person either. So I think all of that informs the way the plot kind of unfolds.
Did you know everything about the character before you wrote it, or were you sort of surprising yourself, or did you have a plot that you were going back to?
Yeah, so this one changed quite a bit actually. I think the characters themselves developed a chunk. So some of them became worse and some of them became better. I think I really had to find out where the edges of them were with this one. I mean, at the center of this, and the people we haven't talked about so much are the students that she's sort of infiltrating. So they're all very privileged kids, and they are kids, you know, they're 20, 21, they're about to graduate. They, all of them have a lot of wealth and parents who support them in some ways, but in other ways have been incredibly bad for them. So they're all damaged. There's a lot of damage there. And that's why they're drawn to each other. And it's why they ultimately are the people who are, you know, the suspect pool. They were Holly, the murdered girl's friends. They were there with her on the night, and they all have big things which are driving them, which are not healthy. And trying to work out how far those characters would go and exactly what steps they might take to protect themselves, that was definitely something I had to find out as I was writing. Because I think the one thing that you can never do as a writer is push a character to do something that wouldn't be convincing. And also I think one of the things that's really good is I also have, you know, my two brilliant agents, my editor and my assistant editor, are also very on that. So we have a lot of conversations around these things. You know, if is that ringing true for them when I send a draft in? You know, does that character seem like they're acting in the right way, or am I forcing it because it makes the plot go forward? And actually, if that's happening, the plot needs to go in a different direction because it's not the right thing. So it's a lot of fun drawing that all out. And sometimes, you know, it's really frustrating because you think you've got it and then you realize that you've only got it because you're forcing someone to do something that really realistically they wouldn't do because of the way you've set the character up. So you have to find out how that would go, and then it ends up in a different place entirely. So in fact, the way that the ending panned out changed a huge amount between the start and the finish, and it was the right thing. You know, it should have changed like that. It made a lot of sense. So
Oh, wow. That's a really interesting insight. And I think the it comes across really clearly reading the book how much you kind of wanted to confuse and create a little bit of suspense, and like you say, you don't know who to trust. It came across really clearly, and I think that was the main point for me that kept me kind of like I couldn't put the book down because I just needed to know.
great.
Which I guess as a thriller and a crime novel is exactly what you need.
So I'm really glad that it worked like that, because I definitely, for me, in a novel, that's so what I feel. And I think also that the other thing I always want is that feeling of those personal relationships driving forward as well. It's the two things. It's you want to see, if they're going to blow apart, you want to see that happen. If they're going to resolve into, I don't know, a romance or a breakup or whatever it is, I want to see that happen too. So I suppose it was all those parts moving together, and yeah, all of them were kind of constantly at play. So it was an interesting thing to write, and actually I think it then took maybe a little bit longer than some of my other books because it had, you know, that whole extra layer of that backstory of the detectives and, you know, their relationship. And when I say detectives, I mean a journalist and a detective, but yeah, the two of them. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun.
No, brilliant. And it is a standalone away from your popular DCI Jonah Sheen series. What made you want to step away from Jonah and kind of write something a little bit different?
Yeah, I'd said for a while that I thought in a couple of books I was going to have you know, a break away from it because I was afraid of getting bored of my characters. And actually my initial plan was to do it one book further down, but we sort of talked about it as being a good time because, you know, after sort of 5 books, I think probably retailers get a bit bored of you as well. You're just, you know, it's all the same series and you want to be doing something a bit different and surprising everybody. And it just seemed like the right time. So I sort of changed plan and then looked at sort of all the various ideas that I'd had for standalones. Then we sort of talked them all out, and then this is the one that we went with. And obviously, one that was in Cambridge was a great one to go ahead with because it meant I was here, and there's a certain sort of brilliant glamour about particularly university life in Cambridge, and then kind of getting underneath it and seeing what's there. You know, the dark side, the light side, all of it. And Also, it was a great excuse to go to Trinity May Ball and do some research. I mean, that was lovely. I honestly, for a full hour, I did my research and I worked out what everything was, and I worked out how you get away with murdering someone. I worked out where all the exits were. I worked out where you'd get seen, where you wouldn't get seen. So I was like, right, done my research now. And then for the rest of the evening, I had a really nice time. So it was grand. So that was obviously not the direct motivation, but it was quite nice. So yeah, there were lots of reasons, and I think the nice thing now is, having had a chunk of time away from my regular characters, I'm itching to get back to them. And I think that's how it should feel, that, that real urge to take their story forward. And I have so many plans for them that I really want to see through. And I've got at least the next 3 books plotted out in terms of their stories. So I'm now like, oh yeah, great. I can really sort of feel where that's going, rather than sort of feeling a bit like, okay, and another book, which I think is a really good reason for having a little break and doing something different.
Definitely. So going back to Dead to Me, the dark academia and the police corruption meeting is a very intriguing backdrop. What drew you, apart from the fact that you live there, to Cambridge University as a setting for danger and suspense?
I think there's a really interesting kind of juxtaposition between university life in Cambridge and then the city as a whole. And having both lived here and been to university here, I think it's seeing the two sides is really interesting, because the two halves of the city live absolutely together and kind of also don't touch. So, you see then a bunch of students processing through the city on a day, and then you also then see another kind of group of uh, footballers moving through the city on another day to get to a match, and the two barely intermingle, and yet they're both integral parts of the city. And I think that that is a really interesting side to Cambridge, and one that was just really interesting to explore. And if you look at the difference between how the police have to work between those two spheres, I think that's really interesting in itself. And in fact, what we've got here is a whole extra remove, because Reed is actually a Metropolitan Police officer from London, who gets dragged in because Anna lives in London normally. She's a London journalist. She's come up to Cambridge to do all this stuff. He gets dragged in essentially because her dad cannot convince the police that she's actually in danger. That's the problem. He can't, because she's only been missing for a little while. He's not really super close to her, so it was not that common for her to contact him all the time. She's often late for lunch, so this isn't worrying. There's lots of reasons why they wouldn't take that massively seriously, and she's a grown up. So it's up to Reed to step in if she's going to be found, and found before something bad happens. So that's the whole extra kind of layer of the two things colliding. Was he's not even a Cambridge person, and he then is trying to work with the students there, and then the whole extra layer as well of their parents, who are, some of them still live in the city, some of them are elsewhere, but are they involved? Are they trying to cover it up? So there are a lot of different aspects to it, which were lots of fun to kind of put together.
Yeah, really intriguing. You wrote an article for Writing Magazine and you spoke very openly about how difficult it was to keep writing when real life became uncomfortably close to the story you were telling. How did stepping back and giving yourself permission to write something different help you rediscover your flow?
Yeah, it was definitely the right move. So the problem I had with this one was it was just a really bad timing issue, where I was 3 weeks into writing it, and obviously it centered around a breakup, and then I had a big breakup myself. Just terrible timing. Sometimes life throws these things at you, and that's just too similar. You, Writing, I think, can be very cathartic, but you need it to also feel like a bit of an escape, like a safe space to move into. And I just found myself not wanting to open the document at all, not wanting to get in the heads of these characters, because it was way too close to what I was living. So I knew that I wanted some sort of catharsis. I still wanted to write things out, but the way to do that was to write something that was much further away, much further removed. And so having discussed it with my editor, who is just fantastic and super supportive, he was really happy for me to write something else for a little bit. And I had another idea of a book that I was excited about. So it sort of also felt like money in the bank for later, because then I ended up with, 25,000 words of something that will one day probably also be a really good thriller. but was nothing like it. It had nothing to do with it. It was about a single parent who had none of that going on, and it was great. So I felt much better. And then there was still emotion in what I was writing. So the emotion was totally different. It was about other members of her family. And that meant also that emotion was very safe because it was one step removed from what I was experiencing. And it helped hugely. So every time I was writing, I actually felt good and better and kind of cleansed rather than feeling like I was stuck in this really uncomfortable headspace, trying to channel thoughts that were very much too close to what was really going on. And I think it's always important to bear in mind that you can allow yourself to do that. You then don't feel like you're failing because you're still producing. You don't feel like you've lost the ability to write because of course you're then writing something else and you're still writing it really quickly, or at least at some speed. And you remember that it's just that topic that's too close. And there will be times, I think, that everything can be so tough that actually you can give yourself a complete break from writing and not worry about that either, and know that you can come back. But if there is something else that you can write that makes you feel better and comfortable, it might be you want to go and write, a middle grade book, which is, feels very comfortable and very safe and has nothing really horrifying happening, and the threat feels less. It might be you want to write, you normally write a thriller and you write something that's cozy for a while because it's just a comfortable world to escape into, or the other way round, because thriller just feels, the kind of thriller you're writing now feels less sort of soulful and heartfelt, and therefore it's safer in that way. Whatever the change is, I think it can be incredibly helpful, and it might just produce something that's spectacularly good because you've given yourself an opportunity to change. And I think that's also worth bearing in mind.
I think that's excellent advice. Just because you're stuck in one place, you don't have to stay still. You can be moving, and the destination might not be straight from A to Z, but you can have some detours. And I think that would be really helpful for people to hear.
I hope so. I mean, it was, yeah, definitely helpful for me. And I think also being willing to ask for the help and say that you're struggling. I think all of us hate saying it. I cannot stand having to say, I'm not going to do this on time, or I hate telling everyone I'm ill, and can't do a thing. Hate it, absolutely hate it. But it turns out it's actually the better thing to do. It does
Yeah.
actually turn out to be true. That if you just say, I can't do this for this reason, then your life gets better in general, because there are very few people who won't want to help in those circumstances. I mean, the people working with you on a book, if you are in contract, and if you're not, it's also similar, that the people who might be waiting on a book, they want the best out of that book. They don't want a book that's going to be rushed or tortuously hard to write for you. They want it to be the best it can be, and that means you being in a headspace where you're, okay.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's brilliant advice. And just so taking it back to your debut, She Lies in Wait, which came out 2019, am I right?
That's right. Yep, that's
So that became an international bestseller and a Richard and Judy Book Club pick. So looking back on that now, what was that whirlwind like of kind of getting your first bestseller and it being your debut as well?
So it was completely fabulous, and I felt very lucky. I think it's interesting because I was, by that point, 21 years into trying to get a book published, because I'd first started when I was 14. And obviously, those first years, I was just convinced that my first book was amazing and then my second book was amazing. Of course, they weren't, they were terrible. But I think you have a bit more ability to accept that maybe you need to learn a little bit more and then you'll be ready. But for a lot of years after that, I had kept in the background of my work or my university career trying to send books out and get an agent. And then when I finally did get an agent, my first book actually didn't sell to any publishers, so I had to write a whole second book. And that's really common, like it's incredibly common for that to happen, but I didn't realize that at the time, so I felt like I'd really failed. um so when She Lies in Wait eventually did sell, I was quite, at that point, quite, I'm almost distrustful of it going well, I think, because I think I'd had a lot of knocks on the way. And in some ways, I think it's quite helpful to be like that, because you just don't, you are really happy about the good stuff, but you don't sort of assume anything and you're not reliant on it. And I mean, for example, with the hardback, I just missed out on charting at that point. But I'd had a really useful chat with my editor who'd said, based on the figures we have at the moment on retail slots we have, I don't think that you'll get in the top 10. So to get close was then really good news rather
Yeah.
than bad news, you know. And what you realize is actually charting is incredibly hard because there are so many books out in any given year. There's just so many that it's going to be incredibly difficult. And then I was very lucky in that in the gap between then and the paperback, it came out in Germany and then was a Spiegel bestseller for I think about 14 weeks, which was incredible. So it just sat there doing really well over there, which made me feel like, well, if it hasn't done super well over here, it has done well over there. And then when it came out finally over here, it then was a Richard and Judy pick, and then it charted in its paperback form. And by that point, I had convinced myself it wouldn't chart over here. Completely convinced myself because I just thought, you know, no, it just won't happen because it didn't quite make it the first week. And I thought, right, well, it won't chart, and I was completely okay with it. So I was actually genuinely gobsmacked when it made it on its second week. Absolutely gobsmacked. And I think took probably about 24 hours to genuinely accept it had happened. And so I think it was a really interesting sort of whole year of experiences. It was a funny kind of thing. And actually, I think that kind of all went that whole kind of slight disbelief element was the same even when I first got my kind of contracts because I was so used to things not quite landing by that point that I'd had a smaller offer in, and then the offer came in from Penguin, and my fab agent Felicity rang me up to say, right, we've had this serious offer in now, and I was like, right, okay. And I just couldn't really believe her. It was odd. Like, I just couldn't take it seriously until eventually the paper came through. And then I think I was like, oh my gosh, actually happening. Like, very strange. So I think that probably is something that other people who have taken a long time to get there will be familiar with, that kind of slight, you know, distrust of good news. You're kind of inured to the bad news. And I think it's probably different for the occasional people who do get a kind of overnight success story that we talk about. But I will add also that is incredibly rare. There are very few writers who genuinely have that. When you actually talk to them, most of them have a string of books that never sold. Some of them will have had an agent and have had 4 books that didn't sell and then sell a 5th one and it's done amazingly well. But we don't talk about the other ones because you're all about the success story, and that's really understandable. But I actually also think that for other writers, it would be so lovely if we did, to know that failure is fine and that all that happens is you learn a bit more about your writing each time. You get a bit more feedback and think, right, I'm going to take some of that on board. That I can't take on board because I don't agree with it. And, you know, you learn and you grow the whole time. So I think it's a very interesting process, the writing and publishing process. It's not what it always appears from the outside, I think.
I think that's massively one of the reasons why we have this podcast is to show that people that you might think are have had the success overnight, they actually haven't. And going back and kind of diving a little bit deeper into those stories, it helps writers one relate and also gives them a little bit of hope that if they have been doing it for 20 odd years and they've not had the success yet, it doesn't mean that they're not going to.
Exactly.
It's never black and white. And I think it's really important for our listeners and our audience to actually hear the real kind of authentic stories of, yeah, my first 10 books were absolute rubbish, but I'll get there. And
Exactly. And even if what you're producing isn't rubbish, but it's just maybe not quite ready yet, or it's just not, you know, it's not quite so marketable yet, or maybe, I mean, a very common thing, because I do a lot of now, because I know how it feels. I do a lot of helping authors with submission packages for agents, including looking at, you know, their synopsis and what they're writing and the whole themes of it all. Often authors end up slightly between a couple of genres. And that can work really well if it's a deliberate blend of genres. And I think that can be absolutely terrific. But if the book is just not quite sure what it is, with some beautiful writing and a great basic concept, that's very hard for an agent or an editor to place and sell because retailers have shelves, you know, designed around specific spaces. So it might be that all they need, all you as a writer needs, is to move it slightly sideways into a very specific genre, and then it'll fly because, you know, you've got the writing ability, you've got the characterization, you've got a really good idea that just needs to be very specifically one genre. Or it needs to very consciously span two, but know that it's doing that, and stay within the rules largely in the rules of one and borrow from another, which is a different, again, a different technique. And all of that really, really helps people to get places. But I think then there's no one generally to be able to, who's able to tell you that when you're trying to get there. And so it's something I'm really committed to doing now for other people, because I know how tricky it was. I learned a huge amount from the UEA Creative Writing MA, and in particular for my book pitching from the fabulous tutor there called Michael Lengsfield, who had a background in film. And basically, he essentially read my synopsis, original synopsis efforts, and was like, "What were you thinking?" It was just because it was all just plot, 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 too many characters, and it was really confusing. And he taught me how to do it. And he is the reason that people wanted to read my stuff, because it suddenly made sense, and it was, it was engaging, and yeah, and I owe him a lot. So being able to pass on some of that learning is just a really nice thing to be able to do.
Oh, that's brilliant. And kind of speaking about films and bits and bobs, you've written plays, video games, and novels. Even while being a single parent, which hats off to you. How do you balance those different types of writing, and how do you find time for it all?
So, not very well is the main answer. I've kind of done them at different points. I haven't done any theatrical writing for quite a long time, which I'd love to do some more of again. It's just really difficult to try and do the two. I did the games writing whilst I worked for a big international sort of translation and localization firm, and it was great fun. So it was whilst working with games companies who were based in, say somewhere like Korea, who are bringing a game into the UK market. So it originally started with writing dialogue for them and stuff, and worked up. So that was basically at that point my full-time job was writing those sorts of things, and then other creative copy, advertising, marketing, and then internal copy for the company. Super fun, but it was a whole full-time job. So the only way I was fitting my novel writing in was taking holiday, dumping my kid on my parents for a few days, going and sitting in a cafe and writing furiously, and then sending it to my agent. And fortunately, during that period, because that was when I was trying to write this whole second book after the first one hadn't sold, my agent basically stalked me until I'd finished it. So that was great, because I think otherwise I probably would have found it really hard to keep the momentum up. She was fantastic. She just kept on being like, would love to read it. Hello. So I was just like, right, I need to get this finished. And then, so that became She Lies in Wait. In terms of now, I mean, I've been trying to balance this year doing technical writing, which is a whole other game with the novel writing. And that is tough, because that's a whole frenetic, different industry in itself, where it's very fast paced. You take sort of information from a scientist and you turn it into something. And it's a slightly different part of your brain, I think, but it's also very creative, and it's a ton of fun. But I think I need to work out a better way of working out when I'm doing each one, because sometimes I end up trying to write afterwards and then my brain's just mush. And then I'm like, oh, this isn't working. And then on the weekend it's fine. But yeah, I think one of the things always to bear in mind is, if you can do little tiny bits, what normally happens is you start to really enjoy it again, and you start to then look forward to it and to want to do it. So even when you're tired, then you don't mind sitting and writing, because you're kind of thinking, oh, and I really want to write that scene. If you tell yourself at the beginning, I have to write 10,000 words this week, you'll think of it like a job and you won't want to do it. And I think we just have to trick ourselves into it being a guilty pleasure instead of a job and a task that you have to do. And so just finding the ways of being like, oh, good, I get to sit down and write. Another thing I would do is, I share a bathroom with my teenager. So here I'm sitting, the bathroom's just over here. If he's in the shower late in the evening and I want to get in the bathroom, my laptop's right here. So I'll just open it up and just do a few words. And that's a really good way, because even if I'm tired and a bit mushy, I can do something at that point. And knowing how long he manages to sometimes take in the bathroom if he starts looking at his phone, sometimes that's like half an hour of work. So it's great. And I think those are other good ways. You just tell yourself, well, I'm only going to look at it. And then suddenly you're like, oh, and you've got actually into it. So rather than telling yourself I'm going to do an hour and a half, which seems you're just telling yourself you're going to have a little look. So those are my tricks, and I think probably most of us function in similar ways in terms of those little dopamine hits that we get. So that'd be my advice. But whatever it is that makes you enjoy it, look forward to it, and not feel like it's a pressure, I think is the way if you're struggling to fit it in. And then be kind on yourself too. If you have had just a really tough week and you just think, gosh, yeah, I'm going to really struggle this week, that's okay as well. It happens to all of us. I have at least 2 weeks every year where I'll suddenly have a bit where I just really feel like I can't do it, at the end of which I suddenly convince myself I can't write anymore. And then as soon as I start again, I'm like, oh no, it's fine. And every single year I'll go through this. So again, I think not beating ourselves up is a really good thing.
That's really good. And I'm going to take that advice because I have 2 teenage sons who spend hours in the bathroom. So I'm not going to be frustrated now. I'm going to use that time productively. So thank you.
It's such a good one. It just converts it in your head, I think. And it's so helpful. Like it's a little treat time instead. But yes, I used to get so annoyed,
What do they do in there? Don't want to know.
honestly.
Anyway, crime fiction often requires complex plotting. How do you approach weaving twists and keeping readers hooked and without giving too much away?
So I think it's a combination for me. I think everyone's different on this. For me, it's a combination of a basic plan and living with it in my head a lot. So I'm kind of it's in the background all the time with stuff sort of feeding in. And being willing to constantly think like the reader whilst writing. So I really like to have basically a plan which essentially goes start, sort of 25 point sort of movement, midpoint twist usually, and it never ends up being the midpoint. For some reason, it always gets pushed back to like after the midpoint, but fine, technically a midpoint twist. Then 75% turn, then the finale. That will always be plotted out for me, but it's like a few, that could take a page to write out. And that's all I write out in terms of, notes, except for little character plans, which I quite like. And that's just felt tip pens and colours and, that's kind of the fun, backstory bit. But in terms of plot, that's all I write out. Because the rest of the time I want to be free to move bits in my head. And I think that doesn't suit everybody. I think it depends on how many books you've written, because I think earlier on I would have struggled more to do that. Now I'm used to doing it. It's much easier to keep everything in my head. As I'm writing, if I then think, something I've now changed here is going to affect something earlier on, what I do is I put a note for myself being like, this will need to change. I don't interrupt my flow at that point until I get halfway through the whole book. And when I'm halfway through, I go back and I totally rewrite the first half. And then the second half is super easy to write because all those bits are already in place and I can kind of see where it's going. So that for me is the process and how it works. I know other people who do it really differently. I know other people who make massive plans and that works for them, who write a lot down. My issue with if I make a massive plan is I then stick to it when I shouldn't. Like I have tried it, but then I end up sticking to it when actually, as a reader, I need something else at that point, and I need to be feeling something different, or actually at that point I'm suspecting somebody else, so therefore it needs to move in a different direction. So that's why I have to just keep it all in my head more. But that works for me, and other people are better at doing a plan and then letting the plan change. So I think it really depends on what suits you as a methodology.
Many writers would struggle with sustaining a long series. What's kept the Jonah Sheen's books fresh for you across 5 novels?
Oh, I think it's a combination of things. I love my characters. I love a team dynamic. One of the things I always wanted to do when I started writing them was two things. One is to write books where we always feel something, feel empathy or whatever it is for the victims. It's not just, oh, here's a dead body to move the plot along ever. There's always, it matters because I think people's lives matter. I think anyone dying, even if they've done some things to deserve that death, I still think it matters, and I still think we need to feel that. And so a lot of it is seeing a lot through the victim's eyes. So half of those books is always viewed through either a victim's eyes or the eyes of someone who's really involved in it. And I think that doing that means you're not just focused on your team, you're focused on a whole other side, which means the team getting less space almost makes you like them more, because you've got more that you want to say about them but you don't have room for. So every single book there'll be something about the team and their backstories or their little thread that I have to move to the next book because I don't have space for it. Because if I had that in there, it would slow everything down too much. And that's another great thing, because it just keeps you wanting and wanting to, to move forward. The other thing that I really wanted to do was to write a team who function well and are actually really nice to each other, because there are so many detective books, and I'm not criticizing this at all, but it's a general thing where you have dysfunctional detectives who have, normally alcohol habits or whatever, unhealthy working relationships, and then they're kind of nasty to each other a lot of the time. There's a lot of, generally really harsh banter, kind of like a lot of sort of one-upmanship, and they're always having to kind of fight to have their place. They've normally got a boss who's mean to them, and that's, a traditional kind of setup, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I really wanted to do the other thing, because I really like kind of nice environments. I kind of wanted to write one, where everyone is supporting each other, and just gelling well and really working as a team. And it doesn't mean they don't have their moments. Like, they'll have their moments when they're not understanding each other and things aren't quite right. But in general, they're just, people who really support each other and get on. And one of the reasons for that actually is that they are a team where everybody has a role and they're not all the same. So I was looking back at it after I'd written the first book and realizing that they are basically what you'd call a Belbin balanced team. I don't know if you've ever done a Belbin test, but it's like a team test that identifies what role you play in a team. And the perfect Belbin team is a balanced one. It has a bit of everything. So you have your creative people, your organized people, your people who drive forward, your people who drive other people, your people who draw out other people's strengths, your people who are all about making sure everyone's okay. And all of those things existing in a team means the team functions really well. So there are these 9 roles. I used to work for Belbin, so I used to do marketing for Belbin, and that was my first sort of really full-time job out of university, and so and I have a lot of fondness for all of those guys, and I basically wrote a Belbin balanced team without even really thinking about it. And I think that's also a lot of it too, that they all have something they bring to the table that is unique, and they all fit together because no one's trying to compete for the same stuff. They're all different, and so that was the other thing too. I think that really drives me too, that I like they're just it's warm. We're in a realm where horrible things are happening over here, but these guys are doing everything they can to make sure that their lives are okay.
I have a positive team. Yeah, it's lovely.
Yeah.
Something to aim for. I'm going to look up that Belvin. It sounds interesting.
Yeah. Oh, it's fascinating. And if you do one, like, finding out who you are,
Yeah.
really cool. Like, and you can get other people to feed in to give you 360-degree observation and work out whether they see you in the same way, and it's really interesting. So yeah, it's cool.
Oh, brilliant.
That sounds terrifying. I don't think I want to know what people think of me.
It's only ever kind of couched positively. Like, I mean, you can see some of the strengths and weakness side, but it's more like, are they, are you working in a way that they see as is the creative one or the organized one? And I think it can sometimes tell you why you're unhappy in a job, because if you really are a very creative person and you're just organizing all the time, you're going to be a bit unhappy. So it's a really useful thing, I think.
And what advice would you give to aspiring crime thriller writers who kind of are looking at breaking into the market?
I think don't try to chase the market is the main one. I think it's really tempting to think that you have to fit in with what is happening right now. And that is a mistake for so many reasons. The main one is that you'll never end up writing a book that you really love. And if it's not a book you really love, it's not going to be a great book. It's not going to be a book that readers really gel with. The second one is, by the time you've chased the market, it's going to take you probably over a year to write this book. And if you're working around a job, it could take you 2 or 3. By the time you've done that, and then it's gone out on submission and found an agent, found an editor, and been published, it could be 4 or 5 years down the line. It could only be 3, but even so, you're very likely to have missed that trend. And all in order to write a book that wasn't the book in your heart. So a better idea is to write something that is something you really want to write, but think about it in a way that's hooky. So think about it in a way that if you were having someone tell you that it makes your spine tingle, and that's not about a trend, that's just about you going, wow, that makes me want to read it. So it's got that thing. And often that can be a big question that's being raised, or it can just be a kind of a concept or something that sounds really horrible. But whatever it is, if you have something that makes your own spine tingle, then you've probably got something that other readers are going to really want to read, as well as you loving to write it. So those would be my thoughts on that.
Brilliant. I think that's amazing advice. And we know that you've got a seventh book lined up for 2027. Can you tease anything about what readers can expect?
Oh, so we haven't officially announced it, but I think it's going to be announced quite soon. So it is another standalone, and it is set. This one's set abroad, which has been a ton of fun to write. And what I will say is this one has got at its centre uh, another kind of a couple situation, but this one is absolutely steaming sexual tension the whole way through, which I loved writing. Like I am at heart secretly quite romantic, even while I hate admitting it. And this was, oh, it was so much fun. And I can't wait to announce the concept because it's one of those ones where it's a cool concept to announce. So I'm really looking forward to it. So as soon as I can, I will be sharing, and I'm very excited about it.
Oh wow, I'm already excited.
That's great.
We always finish by asking our guests for a book recommendation. Have you read anything recently that you'd like to share with our listeners?
I just wrote, oh yes, this is actually also really humorously a good link, and maybe why I was thinking of Belbin is I recently read The Wasp Trap by Mark Edwards, which was terrific. And not only was it terrific, but also he's put Belbin in his book, which was great. So having just talked about it, it's a good link back. But it was such a great, like a locked room murder mystery, but it's a really fantastic modern update on the isolated house that no one can leave, and where his sort of secrets from the past get slowly unraveled. I loved it. I could not stop turning the pages, and it still managed to surprise me. And given that I'm a, world-weary crime author who constantly thinks I know the answers, I think that's a really wonderful thing. And I really recommend it. So go get it.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you. And thank you so much for joining us today on the Right Club podcast. It's been such a pleasure.
Oh, it's been absolutely fantastic talking to you. Thank you so much for inviting me on.
Thanks so much for taking the time to speak to us. We've had a brilliant time.
Thanks for tuning into the Right Club. We hope you enjoyed this episode and feel inspired to keep writing. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at Writers Online, your go-to for writing tips, competitions and exclusive updates. Plus, you'll never miss an episode of the Right Club. Until next time, happy writing!